might be numbers, it could be strings, or any other data, and it could contain like a large number of items. In Python, list is enclosed with these two type of brackets, with the items in the list separated by a comma. So an example of that is, for example, car makes. This is a list, or this is the name of the list, enclosed in these brackets, and these are the items in that list. So in this example, they are strings, and lap time, for example, that's another list name with the brackets around it, and this one contain integers, or sorry, floats, which is numbers. A list might contain many items or none, and the following example is an empty list. So car made in Australia equal empty. We will see later what we can do with that, because we can create an empty list that we fill up through the running of the program. And the list might contain items with the same duplicate value. So for example, we have drivers names list and have duplicate names in them. So the list will handle that. So if I ask you to, a review question, to write a code to create a list of favorite superheroes. So that should be an easy, so all I'm asking you is here to create a list, basically, which will be called superheroes, similar to what we have here. And then we open a brackets, and you can put the names, and you choose how big or small that list will be. All right. Now, to display the list, they can be easily displayed. Basically, we just use the print function, where we pass the list name in there, and that will display it. This is a simple way of displaying it, example, and this is with some wording around it as well. So for the examples, the first one will basically just print the list as that with the brackets. And the second one, where we're looking for the time, we just put the formatting a bit different, but still will display it like that. For list, we can have a bit more control over how the list is displayed. We can use a for loop to do that. So, for example, if I wanted to display the items inside that list in vertical way, I can use a for loop. So for make, so in car makes, print makes. So basically, what I'm doing in this function is I'm using the variable make and reading the list from car makes and assigning each item to make when the loop is running. Then I'm printing it. So this loop, basically what it will do is it will go and read, assign the first item to make, and then goes and print it forward, and then the loop will go back and assign now the second item to make, then print it, and the third and the fourth, and so on. So for each loop, it will automatically start with the first items in the list, and then you can display it. Any questions so far? This is just an example of how it works in a Python program. So for this data dictionary, we have, so pay attention to the data type. When we have a list, it's listed as list of, and that could be strings or floats or integers. So in this example, car makes, it's the data type of it is a list of strings. And for this program, we're also now introducing the scope of that variable, so they are both local, and make is also a string. So the purpose of this program is to display the car makes. We identified the car makes list, and we put the car and the car names in the list, makers in the list, and then we use the for loop to make them display. Today actually will be a few more review exercise than usual. So spend 5 minutes, and I would like someone to share their code to write a code to display your list of favorite superheroes. So if you created a list from the previous exercise, in here, I want you to show me your code to list your favorite superheroes. Anyone have completed that? Can share it with us? So it's a very simple program. Will look exactly the same as that one. So instead of car makes, it will have the superhero list name, and it will have the names of the superheroes, and then the rest is the same, with just the change of the variables. So when we talk about list, there's two parts of a list that we need to be aware of. So these the values in here are called items, list items, but these items are also indexed. So for each position in that list, it's to have an index number. Start with a 0 and increment from there. So for example, for the list for car makers, Ford list index is number 0, and Toyota is number 3. So that's something we will be talking about a bit more in today's lecture. But this is the two distinguished things that you need to be mindful of: is the index number and the item in the list. So we can refer to an item in the list by referring it by specifying the list name and the index of the item in there. So, for example, if I want to print the first item in the list, I could specify the number of the index for that for it to be printed. So in this example, I want to print the first car. So I'm using the list name and specifying the index number for me to print Ford. I can also do that like that, which is what I'm doing in here is setting this variable, which is called make, to whatever in index position number 3, which is Toyota. So here's another review exercise. So we want to be using the car makes list. We wanted to know how many items are in the list. What is the minimum item index? What is the maximum item index? What is the value of the second item in the list? What is the index for the second item in the list? And write code to display the value of the second item in the list. So from this wording, pay attention when we're referring to the item or to the index. So when we say how many items are in the list, so remember, when we look at the list, we have the index and we have the items. So for this particular example, we can count 1, 2, 3, 4 items are in the list. And then when it's asking what is the minimum item index, so in this case, it's asking for the index and wanted to know what is the value of the smallest index, which is 0. And then when it looks for the maximum item index, it's looking for 3. When it's asking what is the value of the second item in the list, so because it's mentioning item, then we look at that. And what is the index of the second item? So what's the value of the second item and what's the index of the second item? So that will be number 1.
Does value refer to Holden?
So the value is Holden.
Yeah.
And then when it's asking for the index of the second item, it's 1.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And then write a code to display the value of the second item in the list. So the second item in the list is so to write it is basically we want to use the index numbering and using 1 because that's the second item in the list. Any question about that one? All right. Something else that we can find from the list is what's the length of that list. So to do that in Python, we use this syntax, which is len, and between the brackets we put the the list variable name, and that will give us the length of that list. So for example, for our car makers, which is consists of 4 items, when we execute this command on it, it will give us 4, the number 4. This will be useful. Again, in the lectures, we will be talking about ways where we can use that. Like I can give you an example when we inputting items price that we're selling. We can technically enter these items into an empty list and accumulate them. And then we can add them up, and then to know what the average price, we can divide it by the length of that list, because that will give us how many items that we have entered. So how we do a processing a list using a loop with an index. So another way